the name of this lake? I don't know. We finished the hike in our rainforest, and now we're at a lake surrounded by more trees that are more of the drought-resistant type. And I don't think you can see him from where you are, but over to our left there's a guy fishing, which is perfect because we wanted to talk about something called ecosystem services. And ecosystem services are the goods and services rendered to us by our natural living systems. So that could be a forest, it could be different species, all of the things that make up our natural systems provide us with things that we as humans need in order to survive. And there's a whole bunch of different types. Some of them are just sort of the goods that we get. So timber would be one, fish from a healthy lake would be an ecosystem service. And then there are also processes that are really important. When we were hiking in the rainforest, we saw a lot of mushrooms, and those were doing the process of decomposition. And that's really important so that our whole world isn't covered in a bunch of dead things, right? So we don't often think about ecosystem services, but they're all around us, purifying our air, purifying our water, getting rid of dead things, and providing us with clean food and water. So that's an overview of what ecosystem services are.
We were trying to think of some. We were trying to pick out of the many examples on the hike, and one of the most salient, one of the most important in the development of the ecosystem services kind of economic side of things is in the New York City the Planning Commission in New York City, which is part of the City Council more broadly, was trying to decide what to do because a number of folks in the city had been getting diseases from the water. They had seen really high nitrate levels, which is agricultural runoff usually, and they had like 3 or 4 cases of cryptosporidium in the city. A little girl, I think, had died from it, and they realized that they needed to fix their water filtration setup, and they had a really bad old water plant that filtered about half the water for the city, but the rest of the city didn't have any water filtration. They were getting natural water, and they would just put it through what's called primary filtration, which is a big filter. They didn't do all the other kinds of filtration you can do, which are biological and with UV lights and stuff. And so they said, okay, it's going to cost us $4 billion to build this new plant. We're going to have to figure out how to raise money for this, how to cut from the budget and everything. And a bunch of ecologists came running to them and said, wait, hold on. The only reason your water is bad now is because of bad management upstream. This doesn't need to cost $4 billion. It can cost $1.2 billion if you just go to farm by farm up the rivers in the Catskill Mountains and talk to the farmers and pay them a little bit so that they stop doing these things that are damaging the water system, and they start replanting some native species along that are going to catch those big organic molecules and are going to work on filtering all this stuff out. And so $1.2 billion instead of $4 billion, they paid it. Their water system was cleaned up, and now like 30% of the water that New York City gets only goes through that same old filter, and it's perfect, and they haven't had any cases of any bad stuff, and the water's healthy. And so that's when you have a functioning riparian ecosystem, river ecosystem, and you're able to put some kind of dollar value on that service of water filtration. It's not a part of our economic thinking usually. Usually we think, oh, engineering, building things, concrete, metal. But actually, these natural systems, which have taken billions of years to evolve, are really good at, for example, scavenging nitrates so that they can grow their plants, or killing these big, like cryptosporidium cysts and things, because those are not good for nature either. Yeah, so that's just one example. And then from there, this kind of idea of a water fund, where everyone who gets water in a city pays a couple of cents additional on their water bill, and then that goes to do conservation efforts that make their water cleaner. Quito, the capital of Ecuador, has one. Lima, the capital of Peru. I think that there are some in Chile. I don't know. I know that a lot of the big cities out in Brazil have them. They're just popping up everywhere now because people realize that it's so much cheaper to let nature do the work.
Yeah, the idea is that you harness what nature is already doing, and you protect it, and you finance it, and include that working natural system into your financial models and into your built infrastructure in order to make a system that's actually working better and is more resilient and able to respond to changes in the future. Sometimes it can be tricky to measure exactly what those ecosystem service values are, and to determine exactly what is nature doing for us. Like, we don't always know, right? And that takes a lot of fun studies. Michael was actually part of a really fun study looking at one particular ecosystem service. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, one kind of building on what Yari just said, actually, in the Catskill situation, they've had a lot of big flood events afterwards, and they found out that the same kind of conservation along the rivers has done a ton for flood management, because as the flood is coming down what used to be kind of channelized streams that were in overgrazed pastures and are now part of kind of these bigger wetlands, the wetlands absorb a ton of the energy and the water that's coming downhill. And so a lot of the cities that are actually in the Catskills are getting massive benefit too. And they hadn't even predicted that one. I had forgotten about that part of the story. But yeah, my parents are both doctors, and I was really interested in public health for a long time. And so I worked on a study where we looked at the sanitation services that scavenger communities provide. So both like arthropods, like carrion beetles and flies and things that lay eggs, and then the maggots eat dead animals, and then also vultures. And these are kind of gross, not charismatic animals, and 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 beetles and fungi and all this stuff. But they clean up what could otherwise be locuses of infectious disease. So in India, there's a ton of problems with this, because cows, when they die, can't be, according to their religion, can't be burned or buried or anything. They have to be left for the vultures, which are spiritual, because cows are sacred, and vultures are kind of spiritual messengers. They take the cow to the sky, and so they had these giant vulture declines because chemicals that they're using on their crops were killing the vultures, and now these cows are spreading all kinds of awful diseases because they're just rotting in place and there's nothing to eat them. So I worked in Central America. We were looking at how much for each of these farmers that have cows out there in the rainforest, how much is it worth that these scavengers are cleaning up whenever an animal dies in one of their pastures, without them having to instead drive a tractor up there, hook it up to this animal in mountainous regions. It's really hard to do. Take it somewhere, dispose of it, either bury it or burn it. But we're talking a whole cow, right? That's extremely costly for them in terms of time out of their week, and in terms of just literally money and the gasoline. So it turned out that the benefits are really significant. But that's just one benefit that one part of this, wherever those vultures live, is providing to those farmers.
And and so in addition to it being really difficult to measure what ecosystems are worth and which ecosystem services are happening in any particular system, there are also some concerns that if you just look at the monetary value of something, then you'll put it into your models and it'll be cheaper to just cut it down and get rid of it. So that's one kind of concern in the conservation community, like, oh, we shouldn't be putting a price value on this because it's invaluable. Our stance right now is kind of, it should be one tool, and there are a lot of different conservation tools that are necessary. But it can be useful to put a dollar value on ecosystem services to help bring it into the conversation more. Yeah, I don't think we need to talk about the...
No, that's great.
Yeah, but ecosystem services are really important, and again, like, we have this sort of theme of we're living in an unpredictable time, and a time where there's a lot of changes that we aren't really sure what's going to happen. And so we have to think about not just how to protect these ecosystem services, but how to protect our ecosystem services in a time of great change. And again, one tool to do that is to maintain biodiversity and maintain what we call adaptive capacity, which means, do these natural systems have the ability to change over time with us, and are we giving them enough biodiversity, enough time, and enough space and protection in order for them to do that, in order to keep benefiting us in these challenging times. Yay.